Hello again. As you can see, I'm making some progress on the roots here. Slowly but surely inching my way out, trying to get these inner ones put where they need to be while doing some more splits. It's just one of those things that takes a long time. But today I thought I'd shoot some video on how I prepare for a split, how I get ready to make a split. And on this root right here, I want to take a split from in here and turn the root this way a little bit. And actually, maybe adjust that over a little bit there. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is why we need to shut down and decommission the GE Mark 1 nuclear reactors that we have a few of on the east coast of the United States. And the first reason why we need to decommission these reactors is they're past their design lifespan. Nuclear reactors are safe when they're well maintained and they got smart people there running them. But the scientists, when they made these GE Mark 1s, they said, hey, these things are good for a certain period of time, and then they're going to wear out and they're going to get kind of dangerous. And the reason for that is that, especially in the reactor vessel, where the nuclear reactions take place that produce the heat that generate the electricity, when you're splitting atoms, little subatomic particles go flying around in there, and some of them end up hitting the reactor wall, which is made of stainless steel, and it causes something called embrittlement. And that's when really tiny cracks start to form in the stainless steel, and they're really little at first, but over the time they add up and they link up, and the reactor vessel gets weaker and weaker as time goes on, and that's not a good thing. You want a nice strong reactor vessel. So that's number one reason why they need to be shut down. Number two is they've noticed that some of these old GE Mark 1s are having leaks and other things besides the reactor vessel, and somehow there's tritium ending up in the groundwater, and that's not good. You don't want a bunch of tritium in your groundwater. They say so far the levels are safe, but that's kind of debatable depending on who you talk to. And these old Mark 1 plants, they're not going to get less leaky as time goes on, they're going to get more leaky. But the main reason we need to shut down these old Mark 1s is the spent fuel pools have no containment. That means if there's an accident and either the water drains out of the spent fuel pool or the water is not circulated, that the water can get hot and boil off. And that's a really bad thing in a spent fuel pool, because if somewhere or another you end up with a loss of coolant flow and it's allowed to boil off, or you lose coolant for some other reason, you end up with a bunch of nasty radioactive substances venting to the interior atmosphere of the nuclear generation power plant. And since they're not an airtight thing, eventually it gets vented to the atmosphere. That's bad. And these old GE Mark 1 reactors, they need to be hooked up to the electrical grid to function properly. You think a nuclear plant, you know, it makes electricity, why does it need to be hooked up to the grid? Well, when they need to refuel them, or they need to be shut down due to an unusual event of some type, like there's, you know, a problem with some of the control electronics or something, the plant can't make its own power, and you need to keep the water running around in there so things don't get hot and out of hand. You can end up with the fuel pool boiling off, or the reactor vessel getting too hot, and the pressure goes way high, and then they got to release some pressure to the atmosphere, and they end up venting tritium again, or even a few more nasty radioactive substances. And just in case the power grid goes down, they have backup generators. But those backup generators run on diesel, and they have some pretty big tanks in there. You know, they can keep those generators running for a week or so in most cases. But if you end up with a situation where the power grid goes down for an extended period of time, and you can't get diesel in to refuel the tanks for the generators, you could end up with a reactor meltdown and possibly a spent fuel pool fire. And neither of those would be a good thing. It would render a large chunk of the East Coast not habitable by human beings for a really long time. I don't know if any of you have heard the news, but the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker, and the scientists think that we might have either a pole flip or a magnetic excursion happening. These seem to happen about every 12,000 years. And they've kind of figured out when some of the past ones have happened. And due to the fact that the magnetic field is getting weaker and the North Pole is starting to move fairly quickly, I think we might be due for another one. And there's really no way they can figure out exactly how fast this is going to happen. Okay, right now I'm starting to select the strands that are going to be for the pull. You can see I got 2 from the outside, 2 from the inside. Now how many strands do I want to do? Boy, I think this should probably be another 6. So I need at least 2 more, and I'd like those to come from way deep inside. But anyways, the magnetic field of the planet is what protects us from solar flares. Every once in a while, the sun throws a bunch of charged particles at us. And there's been 2 cases that have been pretty well documented that have occurred when the Earth had a strong magnetic field. One of them was in 1859. It's called the Carrington event. You can look it up. It's named for the guy who noticed the sunspots that produced it. And when it happened, the United States did not have much of an electrical grid. The main what constituted the electrical grid mainly was telegraph lines. And when this bunch of charged particles from the sun, I don't want that one, I want one a little deeper. Maybe this one right here. The telegraph operators, some of them got shocked pretty good because that coronal mass ejection that made the auroras go all the way down to the mid-latitudes on the planet, like people in Mexico could see them, and they were pretty much visible all over the world. Now I said I want 6. How many do I got? Make sure you don't have too many. 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, that's I got way too many. We got to put some back. What happened? And the scientists say if we were to experience a Carrington event like happened way back then, okay, now I think I got the ones I want. That it would knock out a pretty good portion of our electrical grid, and maybe for quite some time, because now we have these transformers everywhere. And the scientists don't think they're going to fare very well in a Carrington type event. And the electrical grid could be down for quite some time. And right now we're more vulnerable. Say if this happened this coming summer, when the magnetic field of the planet is weak, we could really have a mess. We could really get a lot of damage. And that means no electrical grid for those Mark 1 nuclear plants on the East Coast, and maybe for a long time. And if we do have like a Carrington type event, and the electrical grid is out all over the place, it might make it hard to get diesel fuel to refill those generators for those Mark 1s. And there's a few of them out there on the East Coast. And if we're going to have a problem at one due to this, there's probably going to be problems at all of them. Okay, you can see this one right here should probably be the center one of the 6. It just looks like a good, you know, it's pretty easy to see that should be it. So yeah, I'm saying we need to get these old Mark 1s into a situation where if need be, because we only have like 6 days notice when a big solar flare pops off from the sun, and say if we got a really big one, we'd have like 6 days to prepare for it. So we need to be able to get these Mark 1 reactors into a safe shutdown mode in 6 days, where they could prepare to be without any electrical power from the grid for you know, maybe even a month or 2. And we don't have that right now. And plus the other thing about this Carrington type event, if we were to have one while the Earth's magnetic field is weak. The other thing that's kind of pertinent about these old nuclear plants is their electrical control systems might get fried. And if there's anything that I might think might lead to a nuclear plant having some really serious problems, which could potentially make a third of the United States uninhabitable for many generations, I think having their electrical controls get fried by a Carrington event would be a distinct possibility. So maybe we should consider. Okay, where's my big flat pliers? I don't see it, so we'll have to use the little one. It's time to tighten this one up a little bit. But we should definitely get the old Mark 1s ready for something like this. I think some of the newer plants do have hardened electronics. I'm not sure on that. But boy, I would hope that they do. Okay, so now I've got my split there, and I need to figure out which wire is going to be the first one to come across the gap. Bring this one down. Nope, not that one. This one. Now you might say, hey, this Carrington event was a long time ago. What are the odds that we're going to have another one that's, similar like that? Well, that's a funny thing. Once again, we're going to get our pick in here. Just give it a... Oop, gotta get my angle different. Get a little bend on there. Try and close that gap a little bit. And find the next one to come down. Do the same thing. Well, in 1986, we had a pretty decent solar flare. And I remember seeing the auroras here in Wisconsin from that one. And if you go look up the history on that one, yeah, I think that one needs to go down in between those. A large part of the electrical grid in Canada went down. Not for a really long time. They got things back up and running pretty quick, but it was nowhere near a Carrington type event that took out the electrical grid in Canada, and I think it was part of the United States too. And it didn't last very long. But once again, that's when the magnetic field of the Earth was still pretty strong. So we had protection from that event. And I mean, the possibilities, it's hard to say what the odds are of something like this happening. But due to the fact that the consequences of an event like this are so bad, I mean, this would affect many generations in the United States. It would cause an awful lot of birth defects for hundreds and maybe thousands of years. And depending on how the weather was at the time and which direction the wind was blowing, if we had a couple of those old Mark 1s melt down and have spent fuel pool fires, it could actually even possibly spell the end of the United States. I mean, there might be some people still living here, but the amount of radiation would be incredible. There would just be so many birth defects and so much cancer. I think most I think people would flee. And that would be a real shame. So hey, like and share this video if you can. I know I haven't asked for that in the past, but I don't know. I think this is kind of important. And with this whole magnetic field of the planet weakening, and we don't know how long that's going to go on. And we don't really know exactly how goofy things can get if we end up having either a magnetic excursion or a pole flip. I think it would be a smart move to get as many of these nuclear plants as we can ready for an emergency extended shutdown without any support from the electrical power grid. And let me tell you, we are nowhere near close to that at the moment, from what I can tell. When they built these nuclear plants, they didn't really understand anything about the possibilities of the electrical grid getting severely damaged, and the fact that we could end up without grid power for quite a long time. You know, so that's just one of them things. How could we have known? And that's what I want to prevent. I mean, I can see it happening. So I guess I'm blowing the whistle on this. Well, let's face it, these old G Mark 1s, they're kind of like that old car that you know you've had for a long time. You've had to do a few repairs on it, and it still runs and drives, but all the parts on it are getting pretty worn out. And one day, you know, you drive it on the highway and the wheel starts to shake a little bit, and you start thinking, maybe I should get rid of this one and get a new car before this one tries to kill me. I think it's the same with these old GE Mark 1s. They're just becoming more and more dangerous as time goes on. And due to the fact that it's not economically viable to replace the pressure vessel, the thing that contains a nuclear reaction, that they need to be shut down. Whoa! Glasses. Well, and the other thing, well, everybody knows this, the other reason why we need to maybe shut these nuclear plants down is because we have not figured out how to handle the nuclear waste. We haven't even figured out how to really deal with the low-level nuclear waste. That's kind of like the least dangerous form of nuclear waste. Has to do with the stuff used in manufacturing, the fuel pellets, and things that just kind of get radioactive because they're around the high level radioactive waste, or the stuff left over from enriching uranium to build the fuel rods and assemblies that go into the plants. So I mean, if we haven't even found a safe way to store the low-level nuclear waste, it's not looking real good for the high-level nuclear waste. And the more and more of it that builds up, the more dangerous it kind of becomes. Because these spent fuel pools, when the scientists who designed the plants, plan things out, they plan for the fuel, the spent fuel, once it cooled off enough to where it didn't start on fire by extending contact with the air, they planned on, getting it out of the spent fuel pool and out of the nuclear plant. Because these spent fuel pools, I mean, while they can hold quite a bit of the spent fuel pool, they weren't really designed to hold the amount that are in them now. And the scientists thought they'd get that stuff out of there, because the scientists knew that having all that spent fuel sitting there where there's really no containment like there is in a reactor can be a dangerous thing. And it's hard to explain why on that, but basically the spent fuel that comes out of the reactor, they need to keep it underwater. Number one, because it's giving off so much radiation that if it's above water, it'll irradiate the plant workers so bad that they'll probably die. And number two, if you take a spent fuel assembly, because you don't just handle the rods, they're kind of in an assembly. If you leave that fuel assembly out in the open air, depending on where it was in the reactor and its irradiation profile and all these complex things that you have to do math to figure out, if it's out in the air too long, it'll burst into flames. And apparently, when spent fuel, I mean, they haven't done experiments on this, with full-size spent fuel assemblies, because the amount of radioactivity and the amount of radioactive particles that would be given off prohibit any type of experiment with that. They think that once one of these spent fuel assemblies really gets going and burning, you can't put it out. Spraying water on it doesn't do any good. I don't know, me myself, I think possibly if you maybe hit it with a bunch of liquid nitrogen, maybe you can put it out. But that would demand that they have a bunch of liquid nitrogen on hand, and I'm not even sure if that would work. But that might be something that we need to figure out too. I've not read anything about anybody doing research on how you would put out a spent fuel pool fire. And let me tell you, if something happened like one of these GE Mark 1s, say an earthquake hit or something, or a plane flew into the reactor building and put a big crack in the spent fuel pool and the water drained out. If something like that would happen, in a way it's almost worse than a nuclear meltdown, because reactors are designed kind of for a meltdown, just in case one happens. The scientists were smart. They figured out, hey, we're humans, we screw stuff up, something could happen, the reactor could melt down, let's try and plan for it. But unfortunately they did not plan for a spent fuel pool fire, because they thought the odds on that were really slim, because they were going to put the spent fuel in the pool until it cooled off enough and then put it somewhere else. But that hasn't happened. The spent fuel just keeps building up. And I haven't read anything, but say we did have a spent fuel pool lose its water, or lose the water circulation and have it boil off. I'm not sure on this, and I haven't been able to find any good information, but the last load that was put in the spent fuel pool from the reactor is hot for quite a long time and will burst into flames. And since we haven't done any experiments on that, we don't even really know how much heat that would generate. I mean, could it possibly heat up the older spent fuel rods to the point where they start to, you know, have some more splitting of the atoms go on in them, and could they possibly get hot enough to start on fire also? Because let me tell you, if one of these old spent fuel pools and these GE Mark 1 reactors that are just kind of chock full of this spent fuel, if one of those ever starts on fire, the amount of radioactivity released, you know, like alpha, beta, and gamma right in that area is going to be so great. Nobody's going to be able to get near it to put it out, even if we do have a way to put it out, because it'll just kill anybody in short order. But the amount of radioactive particles that will be dispersed into the upper atmosphere of the planet due to the fact that these spent fuel pools are very hot and would shortly burn a hole in the roof of the reactor building. This stuff's going to go up into the stratosphere and it's going to go all over the planet. But depending on how the wind is blowing, if this happens, you know, if the wind is blowing in from the coast and it's going across the United States, I mean, it could just make such a large amount of the United States not habitable for thousands of years that it's just, I can't even understand why there's not some why we're not concerned about this, especially due to the fact that this whole magnetic field of the Earth is getting weaker, and if there is a large solar flare, it's gonna just really cause some havoc. So that's one of the things on my mind. But basically, you can see I'm to the point here where I just need to keep mashing these around, get my dog leash wrap on there, and hit it with the channel locks like you've seen in other videos, and I got another split done. And then I need to work on these and these, and then maybe do another split on this one over here. Hope everybody's having a great day. Things are cold here in Wisconsin. Brr.